Hello, everybody, and welcome to Open Network User Group Podcast. I'm Mark Tierney, ONUG CTO. People, get ready. New cyber threats emerge daily, so preparing for the unknown, sometimes called zero-day attacks, can become a paramount task for enterprises. Anticipating, defending against the unknown, these cyber threats, they require proactive, no procrastination, proactive and multifaceted approach. First and foremost, staying informed about the latest trends, emerging attack vectors. It's all crucial. Implementing a robust security framework based on zero trust principles can get or help us mitigate the impact of those threats. At least that's what my guests say. We'll see about that. But either way, don't procrastinate. There's no I in procrastinate. Oh, wait. Actually, there is one I in procrastinate. But anyway, get ready. But first, ONUG Fall 2023, it's going to be in New York City. That's right, Chelsea Industrial Event Center, October 24th and 25th. Come join the ONUG global community. Tech execs, enterprise architects, infrastructure engineers, cloud providers, thought leaders, people like my guests. And we discuss and demonstrate the tenets of enterprise cloud, networking, security, policy. The list goes on. Go to onug.net to register for this event today. Use promo code ONUG Podcast, and we'll give you a truckload of savings, 20% discount. You can spend that on, cyber software. Don't forget to share, like, subscribe to this ONUG Podcast. Tell all your friends. Tell all your enemies to start listening to us. Okay, let's get that done. Right. Join me, my regular sidekick, Michael Thomas Clark. Michael's the co-chair of ONUG's Cloud Native Security Working Group, musician, my conscience, and he's been leading us through this series we call The Wages of Cybercrime. We'll get back to Michael in a second. Also joining us, Ken Aurora, distinguished engineer, architect, cybersecurity at F5, hockey player, warrior poet. I mean, what else does he do? I mean, Ken, what else? Did I miss anything?
No, but you didn't mention the fact that Chelsea Piers is right there, and they've got a nice ice rink. So another plug for.
We didn't think you knew. We were going to surprise you.
Every time I talk to Ken, and Ken is a regular guest on the ONUG podcast, I feel like I'm going to learn something new. Today will be no different. We're going to learn all kinds of new, cool stuff because that's just the kind of guy Ken is. All right, Michael. So we just recently dropped a second episode on the wages of cybercrime, and we were talking about what were we talking about?
This very subject: zero day, zero trust. We thought we might have at 0 day first, but Ken was available today. So that's the way it goes in the fast-paced, high-action world of cyber crime podcasting, apparently. So nice. Thanks, Mark. Yes, and welcome everyone to episode 3 of ONUG's new podcast series, The Wages of Cybercrime. First prize goes to whoever knows where I stole that title from. In our last episode, we kicked off an inaugural mini-series, if you will, the aim of which is to describe the current state of the enterprise cyber estate. Specifically, we reviewed the high points, or more accurately, the low points, regarding the current reality around ransomware. Yes, and how it continues to run rampant among technology-consuming enterprises and institutions alike. So much so that something approaching 40% of all cyber attacks in the past year have involved ransomware. And so that makes this one of the major themes still dominating the field of cybercrime today. Today, we are going to continue this conversation further by focusing on perhaps the most prevalent theme, meme, buzz phrase operating in the cyber world, perhaps ever, that of the zero trust phenomenon, and specifically how it can be used to mitigate the potential nasty effects of that old nemesis of ours, the zero-day attack. Somehow, I thought that 0 day had just gone away when I wasn't paying attention, but that is not true. It is still very much alive and kicking. And we believe, and I was introduced to this notion by our guest, Mr. Aurora, so thank you. He always does manage to inform and educate. It can be effectively countered, surprise, surprise, by using an approach involving zero trust. And we first articulated this at the ONUG Dallas conference this past May. We've continued it through a contribution of Ken's to our ONUG.net Cloud Native Security series of blogs. You can find it by going to ONUG.net, going over to the Cloud Native Security blog and searching for, not that, searching for People Get Ready. That's it. And so we're going to bring that forward again today. And we're going to start. Welcome, Ken. I think you've been welcome several times now, so I hope you're feeling ready.
I'm ready. I'm feeling the love here. It's like I've got imposter syndrome at this point.
You're waiting for us to shut up. I know. So we're going to start with topic obvious. That is zero trust. Talk to us about zero trust, Ken, as an idea, as a set of strategies, as a set of principles. Take us through this key piece, fundamental, foundational piece of the equation, and we'll get this thing going, because we know that you have had the Kool-Aid and you know the story about zero trust.
Well, yeah, I'm just imagining people listening to this podcast rolling their eyes. Yet another zero trust thing. It's like, what the main thing, and we've said this, is that zero trust is a way to think about security, and a lot of what's there isn't novel. It's just that it's the latest formulation of a couple of really important principles. The principles are really, I boil it down to four things. It's number one, it's all rooted in identity. Who are you? And it's not just who are you, Michael. It's like, what device are you on? Do I have context about what's going on? But know the identity of whatever it is that you're interacting with, right? So identity is number one. Number two, least privilege. If you were to walk into, let's say, I think we're back to flying around. The 4th of July was a busy travel weekend. You go into the airport and you say, I want to go back there and get this flight. Well, they aren't going to let you on. They're gonna say, hey, where's your boarding pass? Look at the boarding pass. That's the identity part. Now, just because they go, okay, yeah, you're Michael, you got a boarding pass, you get to fly to Maine or wherever it is Michael likes flying to, maybe Texas, and they'll say that's cool, you get to go there. But they're not going to let you into the cockpit of the car. They're not going to let you onto the loading docks. It's least privilege. Another basic thing. We do that all the time. It's like, okay, yeah, you are who you are. You get to do certain things based on what you have, who you are, but you don't get to do anything. You don't give you keys to the kingdom. So least privilege. That was 2. 3, even if I do that, I'm going to keep watching, right? I mean, TSA has got cameras here. I don't know if you guys have probably flown to Israel. There are cameras everywhere, right? Great Britain. It's like I can't walking down the street. Now, it's always, observe and assess, right? It's like, okay, yeah, Michael's on there. He's got a boarding pass, but why in the world is Michael dropping all these little, red cherry-looking things all over the place? And how did he get them through security? Maybe you got through, and that's kind of lead into 0 day. Maybe there are things they're not looking for that you did, and so that's why you've got to observe and assess. And then the fourth thing, which is a longer topic because it also causes some eye rolling, but it's assume breach. Assume breach just means don't assume you're perfect. That's all it really means. It doesn't, it's not anything more profound. It's just like, yeah, and you'll screw up occasionally. Stuff will get through. Have a plan B. Have a way to deal with that. Don't just assume everything will work perfectly and you'll catch all the threats. So there's 4 things: identity, least privilege, observe, assess, assume breach. And you do those things. Go ahead.
It's nothing. I'm about to say that. Sorry, I thought I caught you at a break point. That it feels like motherhood and apple pie, right? I mean, who could ever argue with all of this? And I know people like to argue about the assume breach thing. Mostly people, I think, who haven't been breached like to argue about that, or people who don't know that they've been breached, because just about the tricky thing, the thing that catches me is Mark grew up in this business when we didn't think of those. We actually thought, whether we knew it or not, in the mindset, we had the mindset of explicitly trust everybody or implicitly trust everybody, right? I should say implicit trust. And now all we're asking is for people to invert that and make the trust explicitly acknowledged and stated and verified and confirmed and so on and so forth, right? I mean, that's at the heart of it.
That's at the heart of it. And the why of that is because what's happened, over the last 20 years since, you and I started in this world is, the ecosystem's gotten a lot more complicated. You could say, hey, I will implicitly trust you if you're on my network. And if the only way you got on the network is to walk in a building past a card reader with everybody knowing you and you plugged into the network, and that was the only way you were going to get that IP address, the only way you're going to get on the network, maybe that was okay. You could argue at least that was a lot closer to being that had a lot fewer threat surfaces against it than today, where people bring in their own devices, there's connectivity, your cloud app is connected to 6 other clouds, there's Edge, there's Colos, all this stuff is going on. That's why you have to pivot from, you have to make a bunch of pivots, one of which is you move from implicit trust to explicit trust. A few other pivots are around zero trust, or identity is about, the agent that's interacting, the client, not a network IP. And, that's how zero trust is being practiced. This is also lead in for, a comment you made earlier about, hey, did 0 days go away? I think 0 days are more common. And the reason is that same complexity.
So do I.
0 days. Yeah. How many people use image magic here, right? And don't even know about it, or any one of a bunch of foundational Log4j foundational pieces of software that are just brought in, not even brought in directly, brought in indirectly. Like, your developer says, oh, I need to bring in all these dependencies. They bring in all these source code dependencies. I don't even know what they are. I'm not tracking everything that Python is bringing in when it imports stuff. And so, those 0 days are I think a lot more likely to happen. And
in fact, if I may, they're now much to everyone's horror, they're now combining themselves handily enough with the notion with ransomware in certain key cases. The current hot attack from our what can I call our friends in Russia these days, except not our friends. Anyway, we won't get into that. But those folks, the CLOP criminal gang in particular, I believe it's called CLOP. I'm not sure what that stands for. But they've got this Move It 0 day attack going, which is also a ransomware attack, right? And there was another ransomware attack earlier this year where Taiwan Semiconductor got hit with a 0 day / ransomware attack where they asked for $70 million. I'm still trying to figure out what happened there because Taiwan has been kind of closed mouthed about it. I think that's right, that people are now, why limit yourself, right? I mean, if you're going to go to all the trouble of virusing up the world, why not make it 0 day and why not make it ransomware? So when Mark first brought this forward last winter, as he will attest, I kind of poo-pooed the idea as being some sort of old school concern, right? And how wrong I was. Mea culpa, Mark.
Yeah, securityintelligence.com reported, and this is a bit old number because the period was from 2012 to 2021. And in that 10-year period, 40% of all the 0 day exploits happened in the final year, in that final year of the study, 2021. So it's a problem that's not going away. And I think for obvious reasons. I mean, if you're trying to drop an exploit, why would you drop an exploit that everybody knows about? Find the new one.
Yeah, and even if you've got it set to blow up on a certain date, since you don't know it's coming, right? It's effectively 0 day. Back to your comment you made, I think in Dallas or around that time when we were getting ready for that, Ken, you would use this phrase that I really liked. The whole point of these characters, this is their playbook, is to land and then expand. So come in north, south, presumably, and expand laterally east, west. So yeah, I mean, it really operates that way. And whether it takes 1 day or 10 days, Oh yeah, I know. I remember the dwell time I've discovered is now. I don't know if you've heard this. It's like 9 weeks, the average dwell time for what averages are worth. In other words, we talked about this yesterday. How much time do the bad guys get to spend poking around before they actually, make you aware of it? On average, 9 weeks. That's a long time to figure out what you've got going on, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, you said it's 0 days are about, like, take that airport example I started off with, right? It's about, do you look in the rearview mirror about what you've seen before, which is very reactive and worth doing, right? That's sort of table stakes, but that's not sufficient. It's like if I go into the airport and I have a no-fly list, I can check, are you on the no-fly list? And if you are, I probably want to give you, either want to let you fly, or at least I'm going to give you some more scrutiny. And that's great. That's sort of what security has. A lot of the security solutions today are like that. I call them the reactive ones. They're just sort of looking in the rearview mirror, saying, "What have I seen before?" That's not going to help you with the 0 days. The new people that are coming in that aren't on the no-fly list, and you have to do something behavioral. And it doesn't have to be anything. This is not rocket science, right? Let's take ransomware, because that is the hot attack of the day. Yeah, you got the getting a foothold, right? Basically, there's multiple steps, right? You get the foothold, then you try to dwell, and you recon, and you get a sense of what's going on in the system, and then you go off and you actually extract the value if you're the attacker, right? Where's the value? It's the ransomware, or maybe it's extracting IP if it's some sort of state actor trying to get some interesting information. And each of those steps is a point that in what Wright Miner will call the kill chain. Anywhere in there, I can stop you. Ransomware is the easiest place to stop that. The most straightforward place is just when they try to do the encryption of the files. That's a behavior pattern. I don't care what who you are, right? If that's your MO, I will catch you. I don't have to lock onto your identity. I don't have to lock on to the passport number, the driver's license, or all these other sort of very signature-based sort of things. I just lock onto the fact, how are you acting? And if you're doing these sort of things, that's a 0 day. That's that, if I go back to that continuously observe and assess, that's exactly what it's about.
Yeah.
And for some of the other attacks, yeah, I get the foothold. There's a least privilege. We didn't talk about that, but that's, to me, the thing you talked about, getting that first foothold. That's what least privilege is about. It's, yeah, okay, you're somebody who wants to come interact with my application, interact with my website. That's all good. But again, there's a lot of these attacks that we've seen have been because we haven't locked down. We've assigned too much privilege. People coming in just, why should I have access to like the Microsoft DD environment on your internal enterprise? An example of an attack that a real threat that somebody exploited.
So let me jump in here, Ken. You've talked about several things: least privilege, a little bit about identity, which I think obviously tied together. Maybe some segmentation concepts. I see a lot of this as very policy, establishing policy, enforcing policy. This last topic you brought up is really continuous monitoring, heuristics, analytics. We say that as though it's one thing, but it's so many things, right? I see us needing to be able to understand behaviors on networks, behaviors on file systems, behaviors of users on compute platforms or networks or file systems, right? Like there's a lot to be observing, monitoring, building heuristics around. Not on the run sheet, but let's talk about, if we can, let's talk about AI's role in this. Got an opinion on what happens to nail that down? Because humans can't do this, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. AI's got machine learning's got a huge role to play. And by that, I do not mean necessarily the current flash in the pan of like large language models. They probably have some role. But, all the traditional AI techniques, the anomaly detection, classification stuff, I could geek out on this. But yeah, they're it's the find the needle in a haystack problem. And totally that AI's got a huge role to play. But there's here a little plug to the hyper automation team, right? It all starts with collecting the data. If you don't know If you haven't got the data, you can't apply the AI. So we might focus on that, but that's like, by the time you get to that point, you've already done all your homework. And this is why identity matters, right? Because identity is what ties all this together. Your AI system, your ML system is putting all this together. Hey, I saw my posture assessment thing over here. Notice this. I was collecting system call information on what this workload was doing, and it saw this stuff. And I saw maybe this IP failed authentication at some point. You're putting all that together is what you've got to do, but you've got to tie this identity. You've got to have ways to correlate this. Just like our friends who have been looking at the APM space have been doing that for performance. We just need to do the same thing. We're a little further behind because we're a little bit more complex as a problem, a little more fragmented, but those same ideas.
And the continuous word just keeps on coming back. And this is, as an old operations manager, this is what I know people struggle with, right? In my day job, I do due diligence around looking for folks looking at the state of their network, the state of their infrastructure. And one of the first things I do is if it's an AWS environment, I check the IAM environment, and the answer. It's not to beat on anybody, but the fact is that it doesn't matter if it's large, medium, or small enterprises with big cloud footprints or small. You find all kinds of over privileging going on, and the over privileging of people who aren't not identities that aren't even in the environment anymore. Of course, that's an old one, right? So it's really challenging from an operational perspective to keep it up, and it's exacerbated by the fact that you can't buy one tool, right? I mean, you could say, well, if you're running on Azure, then you use the Azure tools. If you're running on AWS, but that still doesn't get you out of the woods. A lot of people now are doing multi-cloud, but even if they're just doing a single cloud, there's no such thing as a single policy engine that can manage all of this. And so operationalizing zero trust is obviously something that we're looking at long and hard in our working group at ONUG. But it's there's just, where am I going with this? It's sort of like
it's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. And you probably and this was true 20 years ago when people were managing firewall rules, right? It was how do I keep them up to date? And whether it's firewall rules, at least problems just got more complicated. And this is another, going back to Mark's point, this is another role that I think we can use automation. Like, the word AI gets bandied around too much. Let's just call it automation, using whatever sort of heuristics or neural nets or whatever we use to automate that. And it's a reasonable thing to say, okay, well, let me observe what privileges. Let me apply this to like a container. Container does certain things. It accesses the network. Maybe it'll open east-west connections inside your network. Maybe it'll open outbound connections to the outside world. Maybe it'll access the file system. Maybe it won't. Maybe it'll spawn new processes. These are all things you can talk about as privileges. You could certainly imagine automation that just watches what it does and says, hey, under normal circumstances, this is what it does, and it builds that policy for you. You don't have to do this because it's all about the poor human security operators overloaded, and you've got to help them out. And this is that role for AI and automation. And you're right, because it's not just about observing afterwards. It's also about creating that policy perfect.
So, so as 0 day continues and as zero trust is out there, is this big kind of what one of my old managers used to say is, a lofty set of objectives, right? That we have taken on with zero trust. How do we make sense of this? How do you see the connections between? How do you? I mean, let's back up, I guess, and say we're saying that, hey, zero trust is the thing. How's that going to help us with something that comes out of the blue, the pentultimate boogeyman, and or the ultimate boogeyman, and scares the hell out of us? How are we going to use zero trust to fight 0 day?
So these principles, right? Apply these principles. Know, identity. Know who's talking. Know what they're, try to limit what they can and can't do. Keep watching and have a plan B. Simply, right? Those are the 4 things. I think that, okay, those are principles. There's no one product, but now if I were running an enterprise, I'd say, hey, what are the things I'm most worried about? Prioritize. This is a journey. It's not a do all this or you have nothing. It's pick the most important stuff. So let's take ransomware as the example, right? We talked about this a few minutes ago. If ransomware is a big threat I'm worried about, it's like, okay, look, let me build just something that's very focused on, if I see some runaway process that's in there and it looks like it's reading and writing a bunch of files on my file system or going to a bunch of S3 buckets or whatever, I will keep it. I will build something, whether I call it as something as simple as a heuristic or whether I call it an AI system, whatever. There's levels of sophistication, but I'm going to do that. And that will be a protection against the threat I'm worried about. If I'm worried about insider threat, right, I might say, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clamp down on privileges, maybe on certain stores. Like that's what DLP is about. Okay, on data stores, but maybe there are other things that I'm worried about. So it starts with, I guess, another implicit principle in there in zero trust is there's no such thing as zero risk. It's about managing risk. And so how do I'm internalizing your question as, okay, that's great. You know, you guys at ONUG, can you give me all these great lofty ideals? But I've got to live in the real world. What do I do? So I say, okay, what are the things that you worry about most? What are your crown jewels? And what are the threats you worry about most? And then how do I apply these principles of identity, least privilege, continuous observation, and assume breach against those? So I gave the ransomware example. But there are others. If I'm worried about getting the foothold, what you talked about, I'm gonna take a hard look at the privileges that I allow at my front door, and I'm going to in fact do observations. I'm going to detect anomalies, right? Again, use machine learning, detect anomalies in relative to normal data patterns, and use that. As another aside, I think the role of machine learning and artificial intelligence is really to augment the human, not to replace the human. So it'll flag these things, and you still might need a human in the loop to kind of make a final judgment.
Maybe what people need to understand, at the beginning, if they are at the beginning, and I suspect a lot of folks, even in the enterprise, are at the beginning of their zero trust journey, because even though it's been out there as an idea for a while, how many people have really implemented it end to end? Again, no single product, no single platform. But they don't have to do it all at once, right? I mean, right. How would you proceed? But I know you're an architect, and when I was an architect, we tried not to think about operational things, but I know you're smart.
So, Michael, are you asking like what, like if you were providing guidance, would you assign a priority to some of these things, like what to do first? Yeah. Is that your question?
Yeah, sort of take us through what a reasonable approach would be to implementing zero trust that's going to not only defend us against 0 day, but frankly against anything that might be coming down the pike, right?
So
you can't do it all.
Not to beg, not to dodge the question, but it's going to depend on what your enterprise is, what your use case is, and what are the threats. So I went through ransomware, but let's say that I'm a different sort of company. We talked about we didn't quite talk about. We alluded to supply chain attacks. Maybe that's what you're worried about. Maybe your infrastructure, you're building a product or an application or a service that is really just adding a little bit of business value on top of a large, say, open source or partner ecosystem supply chain of software and services. Well, that's probably one of your big risks. So what I might do is, okay, well, first just understand your risk. Say, this is a risk, say, how can I enumerate what I'm talking to? So that's the observe part. Start with the observe. How do I even know what's going on? I see this. This is particularly relevant today. I'm going to highlight API security. It could be your APIs, right. Both your inbound APIs. There are a lot of organizations I talk to that they'll say, I don't even know what all the APIs my developer is putting out are. Just can I get an inventory, please? And do something as trivial as which of them are there any that aren't protected by JOT tokens? Just doing that, right? And you can instrument your code, right? Conversely, in this hypothetical enterprise I described, I might depending on a lot of partner services. I don't even know who's calling what. So I've got customers saying, again, in the API world saying, do I even know what outbound API calls my backend is making out to some other third-party service? Can you give me visibility into that? Starts with visibility. And then you might say, oh, wait a second. I realize that, my database is opening all these outbound connections. Maybe I want to do something. And again, I go back to my zero trust mindset. I want to do least privilege. If you're going to open up outbound connections, I really need to, I at least want to limit that, right? It's a simple form of, hey, you only get to do these sorts of things. And I'd go further. Circling back around to 0 day, it's because I don't know what the threat's going to be, right? Somebody could compromise something. So I can either build, and I probably will still build, something that's very focused, like here's the signature of this particular exploit, and I can see it, right? The thwart signature or whatever. But what I really am going to also be doing is I'm going to A, block a lot of those attacks before they even happen because I've clamped down the privilege. And B, I'm going to observe them even when I haven't clamped them down if something anomalous is happening, and I'll be alerted. So this is why, right, I'm looking at behaviors because I'm trying to stop things I haven't seen before. And my hook into that is the behaviors and the activity, not the fingerprint of the actor or the particular attack.
Yeah. Right.
I'm going to throw in my hot sports opinion on some things, and it has to do with something I'm very passionate about, and that is policy. And I've mentioned it once already, and I would just say that many of these things that, Ken, you've been talking about are driven by policy, but sometimes we ask this question, where's this application going? Should, this database be opened in, what direction or whatever? My guidance would be when you're asking these questions, they should be done with a very strong bias towards policy management, and to do this in conjunction with in partnership with compliance and governance people at your firms, at your organizations. Too often, the IT groups alone are trying to carry the burden of this by themselves, rather than let's partner up, rather than just be, it's Michael or me sitting in front of an auditor getting browbeat for something we missed. Be proactive about these policy and policy management interactions, so you can work together on tools and instrumentation to do that proactive work that you're talking about, right? Yeah. Whether it's AI or whatever it is, it doesn't matter really. What matters is that as an organization, you understand what those things are that need to be defined and enforced, and be able to do it with a velocity. Like the velocity of all this stuff is just going to get bigger, faster and faster, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Totally. I agree. It's like the worst policy in the world is one that nobody will use or maintain. And so you've got, I think and we have to, so it's all about policy, and I'm going to go one step further. And I think it's got to be about policy that a human, this word gets overused. It's another one of these words that causes people to roll their eyes, but it's a reasonable one for now. Intent. Your policy has to be about intent, right? Mm-hmm. What are my governance constraints? Whether those are things like, geographic compliance things, or whether they are auditability, or whatever they are. What are my constraints? And the nirvana would be a policy that's about the constraints, and the sort of more imperative, this is what I want you to map to in terms of like what a data plane or a control plane does. That gets automated. And that's something where, I poo-pooed a bit the large language models, but something like a large language model might be the right sort of technology for them as a technologist building these solutions. But the high order bit is, it's totally got to be policy, and it's got to be policy that is, I use the word, it's risk aware, it's risk informed. It's never going to be perfect, but you're going to say, these are the risks. This is where I'm only take more risk and less risk. Let me give a more concrete example. Identity is never 100%. I'm never 100% certain that that's Michael. It might be somebody forged a boarding pass. It might be somebody using a deep fake to come up with a video of Michael right now. I don't know if it's Michael. But an internal model, even if you don't formalize it this way, is that I have a certain amount of confidence that it's Michael based on whatever context I have. And my governance says, hey, if somebody wants to do different sorts of actions, it's not about yes, no on least privilege. It's about having a certain, what level of confidence do you have in the actor? In other words, hey, if Michael wants to ask me what time it is, I don't really care that much. Maybe it's not Michael, it doesn't really matter. I only tell a person, Michael, what time it is. Somebody's asking me to pontificate about zero trust. Well, I care a little bit, but I'll probably do that. So if I think it's reasonably Michael, I'll do that. Somebody says, yeah, hey, Michael, and Michael comes to me and says, hey, we got a little cash crunch here. Can you, my granddaughter got stuck in Costa Rica. Can you send me some money? I'm going to need a little more confidence. That's really Michael. And that's the governance thing, Mark, how I interpret the governance thing you just talked about. I've got to make the policy understand that level of risk awareness, not risk elimination, but risk awareness. And that's just the identity example.
I'm still thinking about.
I was just going to say that we have all of the intellectual tools at our disposal. The challenge is human. It's not technological, as is generally the case, right? We have to work together. We have to do these things, whether it's in an agile environment, a DevOps environment. So a lot of people are rolling their eyes to a lot of the things that that we've come out with today. That doesn't mean that they aren't valid, doesn't mean that they don't need to be attended to, right? And so I'm fine with us saying, no, really, here's why zero trust matters, and here's how it can, save you from a 0-day ransomware attack and a lot of other things. And today, Mark, we just really
collectively, let's just dismiss the eye rolling. I mean, the reality is there's no eye rolling in security. Right. It's just it's happening. It's happening faster. I don't care if it's old school or not. It's a matter of, do we have the mechanisms to protect ourselves? And are we adapting at the rate at which we need to adapt? And if we're not, then there's a lot of evidence to support that we're not, based on growth of attacks, then once you tuck your eye rolls away and get on board, right? With sure, the ideas can be simple and the ideas can be old, but the ideas are important and need to be done. So,
and in my experience, Mark, the way that you eliminate that is by, and this is happening increasingly, taking these groups that used to think that they lived under different regimes, right? The security regime, the operational regime, the network regime, the server regime. These folks have to work together. And increasingly, I do see evidence of a consolidation around security in the operations space. And I think as people confront these things, I would certainly like to think that they're saying, oh yeah, that's it. Security folks are no longer in the best case scenario the clipboard carriers of old. I know I'm using an old stereotype there, but the Department of No, that's all out the window. It's really
people don't know what clipboards are, Mike. That's the problem. No one really knows what a clipboard is anymore.
Right. My context is perhaps dating me.
Maybe I'll dial someone up to talk about that.
You ask people why.
Dial that back a bit.
Right.
Dial that back.
I was going to say, you ask people, why are they rolling their eyes? Are they rolling their eyes because you haven't told me how to do it? You just give me platitudes, in which case we have to give them examples. Are you rolling your eyes because this problem you're making them? I don't believe in this problem, and that's fair. Then what are the problems that matter, and prioritize what matters? Are you rolling your eyes because of organizational stuff? Like, there's a whole body of work on something called developer experience. Which is about how do you bring these different groups together, and there's a lot we can learn from that world. But these are real problems.
And I you guys both touched on it at the beginning, and it's sometimes it's a matter of old problems, but in increased complexity, right? Our networks are more complex. Our databases are more complex. Our compute platforms are more complex. And by the way, they're all more distributed, at the same time. So, again, our policies need to adapt in support of that. Our monitoring mechanisms need to adapt in support of all that. It's a moving target. Always. So, so get ready. That's what we started with. I appreciate any parting shots, Michael, that you'd like to throw out there.
I do think that, as I said, we've really scratched the surface of this, and I wasn't just offering up, some bogus cliche to explain why we haven't somehow magically introduced all the magic dust that is going to solve this problem. But folks, this is what this is all about. It's an exploration. It's the inevitable, I hope, proverbial journey, and so look to have Ken and folks like Ken coming on as we move this series forward, Mark and myself, and we'd like to. I'm opening the door here. We'd like to hear what you all think. So we're going to have to. This is new. This is a new thing. We're going to have to put together some kind of mechanism for making that happen. And Mark, save me. Go for it.
Yeah, no worries. So Ken, thanks for all your input today. It's, as always, it's invaluable. But the real way to get involved here is to join the ONUG Collaborative. People like Ken Aurora, distinguished architect in cybersecurity at F5, participate in our working groups. Michael's in particular. Again, Michael's the co-chair of the Cloud Native Security Working Group, where we spend most of our time on zero trust, and Michael's team is about to actually has already started the process, right, Michael, to create a zero trust guideline, and that's really at the direction of the ONUG board. The ONUG board is really looking forward to it. If you want your voice to be heard, if you want to project your thought leadership in these topics, come join us on the ONUG Collaborative. And get your voice out there, and you can come on a podcast with us and blog about it, and we'll just solve these problems, one event at a time. So do that. Go to onug.net. You can do it today. Again, tell all your friends and tell all your enemies about the ONUG podcast. Michael, Ken, thanks for joining me today. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks, you, Chief.